Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everyone. I am back today with Sarah, Dr. Sarah Baillie, naturopathic doctor. Also, one of my best buddies is here, and we're going to talk about perimenopause and menopause, lots of different topics around that, that sort of stem out of an article that Sarah forwarded to me yesterday. So, hey, Sarah.
Hi. Hi. I think you can actually call me a naturopathic doctor and a coach now.
Oh, Sarah's also a coach.
Let
me reintroduce Sarah. Sarah is a naturopathic doctor and a coach, and my friend. Sarah, do you want to introduce the article and like how it came about and all of that, and why you wanted to, why you forwarded it to me for me to read, I guess, and then what you wanted to have a chat about today?
Sure. So the article is from The Atlantic, and you found the date, October 2011. Now, I thought this article was new because I'm menopausal, and I read it in 2011 and then completely forgot that I had read it. A friend forwarded it to me, also probably forgetting that they probably read it 12 years ago. And so
Which is so funny.
I read it. I was like, oh, wow, this is great. We should talk about this on the podcast. And as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, oh, there are parts of this that are really familiar, but, just ignore that. It's called The Bitch is Back. It's by Sandra Tsing Loh, and it's in The Atlantic, October 2011, if you would like to reference it. Perhaps you also read it 10 years ago, audience members. And podcast listeners, but it's worth a reread because frankly nothing's really changed. In fact, as Wendy said, it's possible that we've just gotten madder about the stuff that we talked about.
Oh yeah, and we can't do justice to this article because it's so funny and it's so well written. So I'm just going to spell the author's name if anyone wants to look for it. Again, it's The Atlantic. You can find it online. It's the October 2011 issue. It's in the health section, and it's called The Bitch is Back. So yes, we will be using that word during this podcast. Maybe we should have warned people of that, but that is the name of the title. And it is written by Sandra, and her last name is spelled Tsing, and then capital Loh. I don't know if it's her middle name and her last name, but anyway, I was just laughing so hard as I was reading this, but also it's very insightful. Yeah, it's just really insightful. It's a really, really good read. And then, of course, I sent Sarah a text. I said, oh, this is from October 2011. I assumed it was fresh. And then Sarah had that moment where she realized that's why parts of this were so familiar to her, because she actually had read it. And then I said,
I have a copy of it printed out in a notebook from 2011.
Right. And then I said to Sarah, do you think it's too old for us to talk about, or is it actually the case that we should talk about this because nothing has really changed since this article was published in 2011, nothing significant, and we decided the latter. So we're here to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Aside from it being super funny because she just takes everything that every perimenopausal woman is going through, or even menopausal woman is going through, and puts it through a lens of really clever writing and an engaging story. But she takes the emotional reactions. That's the part that really spoke to me, is the fact that she really highlighted the fact that women's emotional landscape changes in perimenopause and in menopause. And we tend to think that we sort of identify historically the menopausal transition as a time when women go crazy or lose it, or there's kind of the mood swings take over. And I love the fact that she reframes this as we're just getting back to who we are. And that actually what is happening, if you think about the time when a woman is fertile, whether she has children or not, by the time when a woman is fertile, let's say from age 15 to 40, is 25 years. So 25 years out of a lifetime, to say the average death of a woman is 80, 25 years out of 80 years, that those 25 years of fertility time are actually the anomaly.
Right.
And that when we come out of that, we're actually coming back to level. We're coming back to who we are.
Yeah.
And I
also
love this framing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing she says that's really cool about that is that that's where everybody else has always been. So.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so this is where I started. The things that I'm thinking about as I enter so I've added this coaching training to my toolkit, and I've been sort of thinking about what excites me about working with women in midlife as a coach. And it's really about living an entitled life. And if you look at the definition of entitled, it's really about like giving something a title. So like defining what it is that you want to have your life look like. But we think about entitled in a negative way because, well, just because we do, because we're all, the millennials are entitled, or the, teenagers are entitled, or white men are entitled. But really, those groups of people, the children, the teenagers, and the men, just behave like they have all along, as if they deserve to be treated a certain way. And that women, I'm working on this theory, right?
Yes.
So that women also should be living these lives of entitlement, and that fertility actually gets in the way of that. And that when we come out of this fertility phase, the point of moving forward through perimenopause and menopause is to come back to that place of agency, autonomy, entitlement, finding yourself again, like redefining what it is that you want your life to look like, because in those heavy duty hormone years, that kind of gets lost. So I got super excited by that idea when she defined fertility as the anomaly. I thought, that's it. Like, that's it.
She says fertility is the change, not menopause. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And then she also talks about the word selfish, which I think is often the word that we women use in terms of how we're starting to feel. And of course, this is a word I talk about all the time in my practice, because every woman I know sees it as a negative thing, right? And self-care, of course, requires you to be selfish. So it's a struggle for a lot of us, because we think, well, how can I do something that's selfish? So I like the fact that she brings in the word selfish here, and then sort of talks about how everybody else, like really anyone who hasn't had a fertile window, so people who just aren't there yet, biologically, or men, I guess. She talks about how they're kind of, their status quo is selfish. That's how they get to be every day, how they get to show up. But when we're in this fertile window, or fertile period, the change, as she calls it, we can't be selfish. And that's obviously connected to some of the things that you and I have talked about on this podcast many times, about the dominant hormone being estrogen, and just driving us to take care of everyone else and to look after everyone's needs. And then our needs end up getting kind of left behind there. So I like the flip from sort of selfish to entitled. I think that's awesome. When you sent me a text about that, I thought, yeah, that makes total sense given the definition of that word. And if that helps women get out of that space that doesn't feel good about taking back some agency and autonomy in their lives, then I'm all for it.
I want to tell just a little story about entitlement. My dad, 80-year-old white middle-class man, lives his life with an like entitlement comes out of every pore of his body, and in many ways it's a positive thing. Like, as an adult now, I'm really starting to look at that entitlement that he exudes. I mean, there have been negatives for sure in my growing up, but the positive is that he believes that he will get the best parking spot at Costco. And he gets the best parking spot at Costco. Like, there's no question. He pulls up like a king in front of every place that he frequents and expects there to be a parking spot there, and there's a parking spot. And I mean, that's one level of entitlement. But what that does is it filters through the rest of his life. So where he expects to get a deal on 3 hotel rooms he's booking for the family, he just does, because he exudes that entitlement. And as I'm, moving into this phase of my life, I'm like, yeah, I want that. I want to be entitled. I want nobody to look at me and think that I don't deserve, and I don't want to ever feel anymore like I don't deserve this because I am a mother and a woman and all the things that make us feel like we don't deserve those things. Anyways,
I'm just wondering if this is the right time to segue into the other Costco story, or should we share that for later?
I don't know. We could move into the other Costco story. Since, this is...
How are we grounding this story though? What's it connected to? Because we had made a connection with the article and the reason to tell the story, but now I can't because of menopausal. I can't remember what the connection was.
No. Can we let's go back to entitlement for a few minutes?
Sure.
I want to talk about something else that we were talking about before this.
Mm-hmm.
And she touches on this a little bit, but this is also what kind of gets me excited at a dinner table when I'm talking to people, is that what is the global possibility if women behave as if they're entitled?
Right.
What happens if women coming out of that change, coming out of the nurturing phase, take back that entitlement, find their center, find what it is that gives them passion, then they exude that energy? What happens, since we're now the largest demographic in terms of age, it's women transitioning into menopause? What happens to the political landscape? What happens to the way that we treat others? What happens globally? Is it possible that if you harness that in women, that it's the thing that will actually save us? I mean, big dreams, obviously, Why
not?
But why not? Why not? It hasn't been us. So it's our turn. Yeah. Anyway, I get pretty worked up at the idea that if everybody gets to go through this, if every woman gets to go through this phase and really be able to design what their lives look like with agency and ownership and entitlement and all of those things, then surely there has to be an energetic shift in the world.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I actually love it when you get fired up about it, because then I get fired up about it, because I work like every day. I'm working with women who are in this phase, and a lot of them are in that place we've talked about, and in relation to other topics on this podcast, but that place where they're like, is this it?
Yeah.
Like, what else is there? And then we get to do the really fun work of starting to explore what it is they really do want now that they're, as I say, fully autonomous for the first time in decades. Yeah. Again. And sometimes it's hard to get them to buy into that autonomy and to accept, admit, embrace, whatever the autonomy. So we have to do that work first, but it is really cool to see what they end up doing and to watch that transition as a coach. And I know that's something you're excited about too in coaching. So yeah, I get excited about this too. I have noticed a shift in myself around all of this, as we've talked about before. And then I see it in the women that I work with every week. And so I believe it. I believe it's possible from seeing what I'm seeing in like my little micro example world of this.
Yeah. And in my office, so I only right now, until I expand into coaching full-time or just even part-time, what I get to see is I just get to see that light bulb moment where we talk about that. We're talking about a whole bunch of other things. And then I always try and include the idea that this is possible and that these feelings are normal. And when that light bulb goes off, that's when I feel the most excited. I'm just like, oh, there's hope. Now we can do the work of now that we can do the work of, clawing out through all the stuff that's been going on for the last 25 years and find that like nugget at the center. It's so exciting.
It really is. Okay. I had a couple little things not a couple. I read through this. I was redlining all over this article because it's so funny. And so I'll do one of my little snippets and then you do one of yours. So I was laughing out loud at the stuff about the menopausal diet because as many people listening know, I have a background in food. I do a lot of work around, Sarah does too, obviously, as a naturopathic doctor. We both are in the world of like nutrition and food. And just yesterday, I had a conversation with one of my clients and I said, what happens if you just forget about the 5 pounds? Like, what's available to you? What's on the other side of caring less about this 5 pounds? What if you just let it go? What does that look like? And we had this kind of fun discussion around, we were talking about menopause and hormones and how all, statistically women gain weight and, like not just some women, the overwhelming majority of women, and how, we get to choose how much time we spend fighting that, and I was just pointing out to her that the change, she's worried because she's eating some more sweets and sugar as a result of not drinking anymore, which is such a common thing. It happens all the time. And so I was saying, don't worry about that. It's no biggie. That'll level out, down the road. But I was saying to her the cumulative impact of not drinking anymore for the rest of your life is just astronomical in terms of your wellness and how you age and your risks and all of that stuff. And this 5 pounds is not it does, as my mom used to say, won't amount to a hill of beans, right? Like it's nothing. So, anyway, the menopausal diet stuff in here made me laugh because she talks about that. I think it's like towards the end, one of her friends says, just gained the 25 pounds. I really think I would not have survived menopause and the death of my mother without having gained those 25 pounds. And that's kind of the conversation I was having with her yesterday about the 5 pounds. But the menopausal diet, she describes it as she talks about how all these diets out there about how to lose the menopausal weight, and a lot of them are very extreme. And we've talked about those in other episodes, but then she says she comes upon one that says, no, the key here is that you have to eat more frequently. You have to eat more often. And she gets really excited about that until she realizes what that actually looks like. And she has a day. She says, meal number 1, 8 a.m., 2 teaspoons non-fat yogurt. Meal number 2, 10 a.m., 3 almonds, unsalted. This is my favorite one. Meal number 3, 12 p.m., 2 ounces low-fat barley souffle, see Appendix D. And it just made me think of all of those diet books when you pick them up and you get all excited, when you're in that diet culture mentality, you pick it up, you're like, this is it. And it says like easy meals, blah, 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 whatever. And every single meal, you have to go to an appendix and then make some complicated recipe. Anyway, barley souffle. And then meal number 4 at 2 p.m. And that's the last meal. Is a small bell pepper and a teaspoon of flaxseed. So that just cracked me up. And then she says, she's talking about vaginal dryness. She says, no wine though, because you can't have any wine because of all the things that you and I have talked about. No wine though. Best to pair vaginal dryness with buckwheat tempeh. Anyway, that just cracked me up, that section.
No, it's also unrealistic.
It's also unrealistic or realistic? Oh, of course. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's ridiculous. No, and that's her point, I think. Like nobody can actually do that. And also no, like just a hard no on that entire
anything that says buckwheat and souffle in the same sentence, it's got to be thrown. I feel like that's the equivalent of when in the article she also talks about Aunt Carol throwing a lamb leg out the window, like a lamb roast out the window.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just and like that inner rage.
Yeah. Let's go to that for a second. Cause she tells that story about Aunt Carol's throwing the lamb of leg out the window. The dad is saying to his kids, like, look out, mom's going through something right now. When Aunt Carol was going through this, she threw a leg of lamb out the window. Yeah. And then she says, I underlined this little bit. She says, It should not be overlooked that throwing the leg of lamb out the window may have been Aunt Carol's outward expression of the process going on within her soul, the reclaiming of self. Perhaps it was her way of saying how tired she was of waiting on her family, of signaling to them that she was past the cook, chauffeur, dishwasher stage of life. For many women, if not most, part of this reclamation process includes getting in touch with anger and perhaps blowing up at loved ones for the first time. And I thought back to that conversation I had, I think first with Jen Sleep Huber about menorage. That was like one of my primary perimenopausal symptoms. And I remember feeling so out of control in those moments with that anger, and just, it felt so alien to me to be that angry and not be able to stop it. And it was the most comforting thing Jen ever said to me, like, oh yeah, no, that's part of perimenopause. And I thought, what? And since then, I've had so many women say that to me. Oh yeah. I totally, thank God you told me that you struggled with that too. And it did pass, by the way. I don't have that at all anymore. I'm on, as most people probably know, I'm on the other side of it, and I'm postmenopausal. But that rage and anger, like just giving it that rationale, and that like, and I mean rationale, like rational explanation. Like at some point you need to let them know this isn't what you want to do anymore. And I think for a lot of us, it ends up coming out in rage, which is unfortunate for them, obviously, but maybe kind of necessary for us.
Well, I think what happens is that A, women don't know this is happening. B, their family sure don't know. And so, and their work doesn't know, and their, the things that they do in the community, like nobody knows that this is happening, including the woman herself. And so there's all these little things that have been, there's a dynamic that you've set up as the woman in the world in terms of people's needs and how you meet them. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it starts very slowly to grind at you, right? Yeah. It's just like, and your voice inside is saying, I don't want to do this anymore. But you say, okay, I'm just tired. I'm stressed out, whatever. I'm just going to do it because I've always done it. And I can't be bothered to fight about it. And so that gets no traction really for quite a while. And then all of a sudden it starts to be, it's like, it's not, it's an unheard voice inside of you that's just like, I'm friggin' done. But the world then says, well, you're being selfish. And so, you might smash it down a little bit more, it down, and it's creating more irritability in your life and more arguments with your partner and more dissatisfaction at work and all of these things. And finally, there's a blow up, right? Which is because nobody's expected it, and nobody sat down and said, okay, listen, you guys, I need some space. I got to start having my own life here. And that should really happen like around 40. And I mean, it should happen all the way through, but let's just be realistic right now. And often you have, like myself, you have older parents who, when they're 40, I had a 1 and a 3-year-old, or I had babies. And so there's no space there. I'm like, entering the world of heavy duty supposed estrogen at that point. So there's a lot of women in that generation who are also, kind of in this position now where the needs of their families far outstrip their ability to meet them. And yet society and the age of the children and all of the things tell them that they still have to be doing this. Right.
Yeah. And then it comes out of, for everyone else, it feels like it's coming out of nowhere. Yeah. And I think that's where that, like, my family was always shocked. I mean, eventually they got accustomed to it and they would just be laughing about it behind my back. But in the early days, like, and then you feel guilty as a woman because you're made to feel as though this actually has no basis and is completely irrational. But like you said, I love the way you described it. It's really that you've been saying this quietly for a long time and no one has been listening or responding or changing their behavior or expecting less of you. And then at some point you just lose it, thanks to hormones probably, which needs to happen because it's not changing. And I don't know, I find that in hindsight comforting, sort of excusing of my wild behavior in my 40s.
Like my mother every 6 months would throw a plate of French toast across the room, like literally, and then leave for the day.
Right.
That was all she had. No language for it, nothing. It was just like the three of us would just put her over the top. A plate of French toast would go flying. We'd all be like, what's happened to mom? And then she'd leave for the day.
Right.
Which is pretty, if you don't have any language for what's happening, then that seems really erratic and scary also to a lot of women. I think that there's a lot of fear out there if they don't know what's actually happening.
Right. She has a really nice paragraph that sort of summarizes what we were just talking about a bit ago, about the biological clock and the timing of things now for modern women who are, many of us having careers before having children. And she says, menopause's liberating narrative dovetails elegantly with a typical baby boomers, females' biological and chronological clock. When a woman gets married in her 20s, has children in her late 20s or early 30s, begins to detach in her 40s, look where her nuclear family is by the time she reaches her menopausal wanderlust-filled 50s. Her grown-up, say 18-year-old children are leaving the nest, perhaps slightly older, say 60s husband is transitioning into gardening and fishing. Her aged parents have conveniently died. Let's say back, and wouldn't it be lovely, when they slipped and injured a hip at, say, 78. Compare that timeline, however, with the clock of my own generation of late boomer Gen X women, putting our careers and ourselves first. We adventured and traveled in our 20s, settled down and got married in our 30s, got pregnant or tried to, fertility problems being the first surprising biological wall we hit in our late 30s or even early 40s. And now what scenario will we face when we hit menopause, which is kind of what you're talking about. I mean, I think it's interesting that you and I you're a couple years older than me, but we're in very different places with our, like when menopause hit in conjunction with our biological clock too, right? Like I would almost fall more, I guess, into that first baby boomer scenario, in that I did have my kids when I was 32. And then, I mean, only because I couldn't have any more. I want to be clear. I would have had kids into my late 30s. I tried, I had many miscarriages, and, but I ended up, I guess, in that category with where my kids are 18 and I'm 51 and they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
But you're in the second category, as are so many women. And it's a whole different kettle of fish when you have young kids at home and you're feeling this way.
Yeah. And the emotional needs of teenagers are so much greater than the emotional needs of children. And you don't know that, of course, going in, but all of a sudden I'm just, parents, myself, other parents in my situation are just overwhelmed by the emotional needs of our children. And of course, the kids are also having a very different experience than we had as teenagers, right? So they have a lot more stressors, and the fact that rage is kept in is a nice segue into the Costco story.
Okay, go. You're up. I can't wait for you to tell this one. Don't send Sarah hate mail. You know what? Don't send any of us, anyone on this podcast hate mail. This is meant to be a fun, positive space. And we try to keep it that way always. And so don't rage on Sarah for the story Sarah's about to tell, which is, I'll let you tell it, Sarah. And then we'll talk.
Well, I'm going to tell this story with the caveat that every menopausal woman I've told this story to goes, yeah. And every non-menopausal woman I tell this story to goes, so
I was in the category, to be clear. When we were walking and Sarah told me the story, I said, and
I take responsibility for my reaction 100%. If I could have sent this woman flowers or something, I would have, but I just need to talk about keeping the inside thoughts inside sometimes. So when you've been liberated into menopause, sometimes it feels like it's a carte blanche, right? You're just like, I am a menopausal woman, hear me roar. I'm just going to say whatever the F I want, right? And it's really, frankly, it's very liberating to feel all those feels and to actually have people be like, yeah, you go, girl, you say what you want to say. Until you're at Costco and then interacting with strangers. So we've been to Costco, and I don't think there's anybody on this podcast probably that doesn't understand the relief you feel when you start to get up to the point where you're going to put your things on the conveyor belts. You're like, please, God, get me out of Costco. So my husband was with me. And so I'm standing there. I'm not in a bad mood. I'm just there and trying to get out of Costco, not irritable, nothing. And this quite perky, younger, like I'd say early 30s woman comes up to me and says, hi, are you an executive member? And I said, politely, yes. Did you get your coupon or whatever those are, your cash coupon? I said, yes. And then there was a pause. And then, have you heard about our CIBC MasterCard? And I said, I don't actually want another credit card. Thank you. I'm good. Got enough credit cards. So at this point, I'm still very calm. And then she says, but have you heard the details? And I just looked at her straight in the face. And I said, I don't care about the details. And as I looked over, my husband was gone. He'd run away. Yeah. I don't know how he had like a sixth sense about how this was going to go. And the woman looked at me like crestfallen. And she said, I'm just trying to do my job, like almost, weeping. And I apologized. I mean, I wasn't going to let that go. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Yeah. I meant to, like, that was supposed to come out funny in my head, but it didn't. And I'm really sorry. And by then she was just like scurrying away from me, like, who is this dragon? But I really struggle with the fact that obviously I owe this woman an apology because it was a really bitchy thing to do. But on the other hand, I was like, but I'd already answered 3 questions. And one of them was, I don't want to hear about the credit card. Like, I'm not interested in the credit card. And so the menopausal brain of me was just like, for God's sakes, I don't care. I actually have no caring. There's no caring in me right now.
Right.
So anyways, so perhaps there's some lessons in when to keep the inside right. voice inside, and when to keep, when the outside voice is required. And I think that's probably a knife edge that we all have to learn as we go from exploding at our families because nobody's listened to me for the last decade when I've been saying, like, I don't want to do this shit anymore, to exploding at the Costco woman. But every menopausal woman I've told that story to is like, what's the problem here?
Right.
Well,
we've all we've all done it. I'm laughing with you on this one, not at you. Well, maybe a little at you because
I think you might be laughing at me. I'm laughing at you.
But I'm also thinking, this is something that comes up a lot when I'm talking to women, and I just see it evidenced a lot in exchanges I have with people where, people say things that are like shockingly and brutally
true, honest,
I guess, in their mind, but like also can be incredibly unkind. And I did that. Like, that's what I did when I was in the menorage phase. I was not lying. I was telling the truth, but I just had zero. It was like there was zero filter, and I had zero ability to sort of to temper it in any way, in a way that, wasn't super hurtful. So I guess I've got my own system in place around that. Like, I don't respond to emails for 24 hours if they make me annoyed. And then sometimes I don't respond to them at all after 24 hours because it doesn't matter. And I'm getting better at just pausing before I respond, which is something that I've talked about in conjunction with meditation and gratitude and mindfulness, and how you can actually get better at that. And I needed to do that. That was a necessity for me in my mid-40s, partly because of what we're talking about, like feeling like I was reacting and not responding a lot. Mm-hmm. So just reacting on the spot and not taking a moment to actually think about, does this serve me? Does it serve them? Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? Right? Those 3 things that we all hear about and tell our kids to do. I wasn't doing them. So I really try, and I am not perfect by any means, but I really try now after it. And again, I'm in the calmer side of this. Yeah. And on the calmer side of it, you don't give as many, F's. I'm doing that because I have a fellow podcast host who told me that someone complained about swearing on her podcast, and now I'm like paranoid about it. But you know what? We swear on this podcast sometimes. This is part of it. Anyway, I felt all of that, but and I still feel all of that, but I really try now. And I think that the calmness on the other side's helped with this. I think perimenopause is the worst for this. Do you agree? I mean, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, perimenopause is the worst for this. I do think it levels out on the other side. And, and obviously, as I've said on other episodes, I'm also taking hormone replacement therapy. So hopefully that's helping balance me out a little bit too, in terms of all of everything. But yeah, I really try to run it through that filter of, is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because, that's what I should have done in that moment.
Yes, I know. But Sarah, it's a learning moment. It's a teachable moment.
Totally.
We wouldn't have this to talk about.
It was all for you. Oh, I just in self-reflection, I just thought it was just so interesting that I didn't care. And I just wanted to say that. I was like, I don't actually care. Like, I've got other things to think about.
Yeah.
And that's actually a theme for menopause, which is when we talked about the no more fucks to give. It's about like changing what you actually care about.
Right.
And, so there's that whole like feeling when it's a very small example of saying like, I don't care about your MasterCard. Yeah. But actually there's a lot of things I don't care about anymore. And I'm trying to redefine, this is like the process of perimenopause and menopause, like trying to redefine what do I do care about.
Yeah, that's totally true, which is incredibly liberating, like, because what you end up doing is caring less about a lot of things. And that gives you that, that thing that's so hard when you're in the nurturing phase, like so hard for us to let go of things, not care, to care less. It's just so challenging, I think. And that is the gift on the other side of all of this, is that it is easier to care less about everything. And then you find yourself in this really amazing position where you get to decide, is this something that I'm going to choose to care, that I need to choose to care of this much about? Like, does it serve me to care this much about this thing or this person or this whatever happened, or can I let that go and just move on? And that part of it, I'm still I'm wading my way through that. Mm-hmm. But, you and I have conversations about that all the time. If one of us gets like all whipped up about something, well, I feel like we're able to talk each other down and self-talk ourselves down in a way that probably wasn't available, at least to me, like 10 years ago. I didn't even have the capacity to have that conversation with myself 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying?
Could you care less? Ask yourself.
Yeah.
Actually care less about this. Yeah. And in the moment, you're like, have no ability to actually say yes or no. I mean, exactly. And to actually have someone pose that to you would be irritating.
Oh, that so question. Irritating.
Like, stop, don't ask me if I could care less. I'm biologically designed to care.
To care as much as possible. I know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is a nice segue into what Christian Northrup says, though, around overcare.
Yes, which is also in the article, and we wanted to talk about that. Do you have that flagged, or do you want me to find it?
Yeah, I've got it right here. So learn the difference between care and overcare. True care of others from a place of unconditional love enhances our health. That's one reason why volunteering and community service feel good and are associated with improved health. Overcare and burnout result from not including ourselves on the list of people who require care. The way to tell the difference between the two is to be aware of how caring for another makes you feel. You must also be 100% honest about what you're getting out of excessive caregiving.
Yeah. This is such a good, you speak, and then I shall respond because I have something to say about this. Go.
Well, I guess what I have to say about it is it's something that we're not taught.
Yeah.
Ever. Nobody's ever said, pay attention to how it feels to look after this situation, this organization, this group, these people, your children, your whatever. Like, actually, like, listen to what that feels like, and separate those two things, care and overcare. I've now forgotten everything else I was going to say about that.
That's okay. I can talk about the last part, which was the part that really hit home for me, that you must also be 100% honest about what you're getting out of excessive caregiving, because this is a conversation I have all the time in coaching with my clients. This sort of propensity we have to convince ourselves that what we're getting out of it is really great. And it's really serving us. And, you know, if I had $10 for every time a woman says, I love my kids, but I love my kids. I actually say often in coaching calls, I'll just say, look, like, that's a given. I don't want to hear you say that again. I know you love your kids. I love my kids. We all love our kids. But that doesn't mean that is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's totally okay if it's not enough. But there's this, you know, we rationalize and kind of talk ourselves into this overcare, I think. And we're not being really honest about it sometimes. And women have a really difficult time admitting resentment around childcare duties. I find they really do. I find women, it's hard for them to say, I resent this, you know, this thing. And I have said before, not here, I don't think, but in something I was writing, I think I said, like, my husband wanted to do 50% of it. And I knew rationally that was a great idea. And it was awesome and great that I had a husband who wanted to do 50% of it, but I didn't want to give him all the control. So I took on the lion's share, and then I secretly resented him for not doing more. And that's a hard thing to admit, but I also think it's a pretty common thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, you know, the true honest answer about what I was getting out of the excessive caregiving was a feeling of control over all of it. And I don't think I'm alone in that, but that's certainly my honest answer to that. This feeling of, like, you know, the whole perfectionism, people pleasing, got like that stuff's tied up in it too. But for me, it was more of a control thing. If I did it, it was going to get done right, you know, which is ridiculous, but
or done.
Yeah, or done at all. Yeah,
exactly. Done, right? Like, I mean, that's also part of it. It's just like, how much are you willing to let the house be dirty? Many of my patients say that they're not willing to do that. And so they would rather stretch themselves and ask someone else to do it. They would rather stretch themselves than let it be dirty, because your partner said that they would do it, and they might not do it till Saturday, but you want it done now.
Right. And I think that's tied up in the hormone thing somehow too, because I don't know, you probably didn't listen to the episode where my other best buddy Megan was on here, and we were talking about empty nesting, and she said, because she's a notorious cleaner. Like, we all mock her for her cleaning. Like, she's constantly cleaning. She does like this thing where she hand sweeps, she gets down on the floor and sweeps with her hand. Like, she's always cleaning up. And that seemed to serve her for a long period of time, but her kids are all gone now. And she's, you know, she's 52, and she is done. And she said that on the podcast, like, I'm done with cleaning. I don't care. Her husband, Jack, God love him. God love Jack. Not the best at putting his dishes in the dishwasher or cleaning up. He'll cook and like dirty every single pot and spoon as they do. And she is no longer cleaning up after him. That she just noticed this shift where she doesn't care anymore. Yeah. Which it has to be, it has to be connected somehow to estrogen.
I also think that it's connected to just the whole multi-level management of a family, right? Yeah. So it's just on, if I keep everything clean, then everything else feels like it's one thing I can control.
It's a control thing.
I can control, how my kids, who's coming home sick today, or, whatever.
So then there's just less of a need or desire to control post-menopause? Is that where we get to the just not caring thing, I guess? Yeah.
I mean, I'm totally making this up, but biologically, if your bodies are designed to have kids, whether you choose to or can or whatever, and you're in charge of a life, and bringing a life to its adulthood, whatever that looks like, then you got to have some control issues. Right?
For sure. Yes.
Like that's your job, and that's what the estrogen's helping you do. Mm-hmm. I think. Yeah. As I said, I'm totally making it up. Do not ask me to quote a study. This is the study of me. I've made this study.
That's how we roll on here. She does say the end sentence in that paragraph about caring versus overcaring. She says, who's going to do the caring if I don't overcare? Just this, like, everything's going to fall apart if I'm not doing this overcaring, which is, I think, how a lot of us feel. So yes. Now, should we?
It's the control.
Do we have other things we want to talk about besides? Oh, one thing I did want to talk about, you may have something too. One thing I wanted to talk about before we go to Brian Hong, which I feel like has to be our closer.
Totally. Brian Hong is the closer.
Okay, you guys, just wait for Brian Hong. It's very funny. So the one thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't think you and I talked about this, but one thing I've sort of like circled is this part where she talks about how he's actually possibly a better age to be fathering at 50.
Yes.
Did you find that interesting? Yeah. She says that she's I think she's remarried, or she's definitely divorced from her children's father is no longer her husband. And she talks about how awesome he is at being a dad now at 50. You know, he's got the patience, and he's doing he's braiding their hair, and he's doing all of these things. And she makes this comment about how he just simply did not have that capacity at 25 when he was, you know, a traveling musician or whatever it was he was doing then. And just sort of just highlighting the fact that men don't go through this same change, I guess, is what she's doing. Is just sort of saying, like, things are not drastically different for them at 50 like they are for women. I think that's sort of what she's trying to say in this. And, you know, that she says, I think my ex became a father at just the right stage, which is to say older.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And then she talks about how there are all these people in the room talking about how to take care of, she tells a lot of funny stories about her dad who's older with Parkinson's, and she's talking about all these people together trying to just make decisions around his care. And in the room, there's her Chinese stepmother, who's 74, herself, who's 49, a Filipino nurse number 1, who's a female and 60, Filipino nurse number 2 is a female and 59, and Filipino nurse number 3, who's a male and 41, and how the Filipino nurse number 3, the 41-year-old male, is the only one who's actually willing to step up and care more and actually take responsibility for whatever it is they're trying to solve, because the rest of them are all past the point of caring biologically. Yeah. It was really funny. Just sort of highlighting again the fact that there's something different happening biologically, I guess, for men in terms of the caring piece.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. There was also something else that I'm looking for here around around that story, but I can't find it. So perhaps we should just
let's go to Brian.
On to Brian Hong and to wrap us up.
So Brian Hong, I'm just not going to be able to do it justice. So I'm not going to try to retell the Brian Hong story. And also it's not mine to tell. I'm going to say, go and read this article, because it made me laugh out loud. Basically what she's saying is that in one of these like middle of the night wakings that we have that are just abrupt, and you know, your temperature starts to rise, you're throwing off the covers, then the hamster wheel starts going and you can't stop thinking about things. These two words keep coming into her brain. Brian Hong, and they just keep popping in, and she has no idea who Brian Hong is, but she feels very confident that she should. And that somewhere there's like a Post-it note or an insurance form or an email where she has promised something to Brian Hong and she's supposed to be responding to Brian Hong. But she cannot for the life of her figure out who Brian Hong is. But then she's just in the middle of the night over and over hearing the words, Brian Hong, Brian Hong, Brian Hong. So I said to Sarah,
dread.
Yeah, I said to Sarah, the Brian Hong bit is so funny. We should mention it. And Sarah says, yeah, I forgot about the Brian Hong bit, which made me laugh because the Brian Hong story is obviously about failed memory and menopause. But that piece was so funny, the way she describes it. And then I think it's around that where she's talking about the cocktail of drugs that we're on in the middle of the night, and how even though she's on, Ambien and melatonin and estrogen and whatever else she's on, she could still drink. I think she says she could still drink a bottle of wine and drive an 18-wheeler safely.
That's right. I'm reading that right now. Yeah.
It just made me laugh because last night, as Sarah knows, I'm actually recording this podcast for the first time standing up because I wrecked my back. Somehow this week, probably, menopause. I can't figure out what it is. There was no real reason for it. So last night I was actually on this cocktail of my usual estrogen and progesterone, and then also melatonin, which I always take. I didn't take the Unisom that I sometimes take because I felt like that might not be a good idea with the extra strength Robaxa set that I was on. And, still woke up completely alert 3 times last night on all of that stuff. And I thought to myself, I could literally drive an 18-wheeler. She's right. And I ended up getting up at 4 this morning. I wrote a whole chapter of my novel. I dealt with a bunch of work stuff. And meanwhile, I've got this cocktail of things running through my body. But I think we just get so darn accustomed to having all this stuff in our system, and to the night waking. We just kind of eventually adapt to it, I guess, or compensate. Anyway, the story's funny. You should read it for yourselves. Maybe we should just go through she has those tips at the end, and I thought a couple of them were great. Did you see those? She says the first tip is the fantastically freeing gambit called "Now That I'm 50." So she basically starts sentences with, now that I'm 50, I don't, now that I'm 50, I no longer. And I was thinking, now that I'm 50, I no longer send Christmas cards. I just stopped sending Christmas cards. Now that I'm 50, I no longer, and you just, you can fill that in with so many different things. And it is fantastically freeing.
Very liberating. Yeah. You should start every podcast now with "Now that I'm 50.
Yeah. I can do whatever. And then the other one that I thought was the whole having no shame bit, which was, she says, she calls it a third related survival tip is to have no shame. She says, the middle-aged women I know clawing their way one day at a time through this passage have no rules. They glue themselves together with absolutely anything they can get their hands on. They do estrogen cream, progesterone biocompounds, vaginal salves, coffee in the morning, big sandwiches at lunch. They take Xanax to get over the dread of seeing their personal trainers. They take Valium to settle themselves before the first Chardonnay of happy hour. This was the line that got me. They may do just a half a line of Coke before a very small martini while knitting and doing crosswords. Anyway, she's obviously, this is in jest, but basically what she's saying is, you just kind of have to own it. And this is the paragraph that ends with the thing about why not just let go of the 25 pounds thing? Why not just get through this the way that you need to get through this and not worry about so much stuff, which I thought was great. And then the final kind of line, and really the nub of this article, I think, Sarah, is in that last paragraph where she says, in the end, the real wisdom of menopause may be in questioning how fun or even sane this chore wheel called modern life actually is. And that's the piece that you and I talk about all the time. And obviously that's a lot of the work that I do with women, and the work that you and I have both done personally, I think, to just kind of say no to more things. Start asking yourself, does this serve me, before you say yes to anything? Setting better boundaries, and then learning how to enforce those boundaries and not apologizing for that. All of that, I think, is part of the wisdom that comes with perimenopause and menopause. What do you think?
And it absolutely it is. And it's a process.
Yes.
It doesn't happen overnight. It's something you have to intentionally work on, whether it's on your own, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with a coach or a therapist. These are actually really, really relevant things in your life to work on. and to turn your attention to.
Well, yeah,
It's
because
really-
even if your hormones have shifted, we're talking about like deeply grooved neural pathways here for a lot of us, ways of doing things that we've done for decades and decades. And so you can't reasonably expect your brain to just flip to a new circuit. It takes work and practice and repetition and self-compassion and for yourself when it doesn't happen and you overextend yourself again, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't. It takes all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
I think we covered a lot of things.
I think we did too. So just so everybody is just a reminder. So the article is called The Bitch is Back. It is in the Atlantic October 2011 issue, and it is written by Sandra Tsing Loh. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And the Christiane Northrup book that Sarah was referencing is The Wisdom of Menopause, right, Sarah? I think so. Yeah.
It's the wisdom. It had a new edition back then. I don't think it has a new edition since then, but it's all still extraordinarily relevant.
Right.
There's nothing in there that is not relevant. In fact, it's more relevant.
Right. And it's like 12 years later, and it's nothing significant seems to have changed from this, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about it today. So, as always, Sarah and I are just really passionate about normalizing the conversation around women's hormones and midlife and the stuff that we're not talking about enough. So we thought, why not come on and also embarrass Sarah with her Costco story.
Please don't get mad at me, people. I apologize.
Come on. Everyone's been there. Yeah. I've actually given myself some self-compassion around that.
Yes. I felt really bad about it. And then I was like, overall, you're a pretty nice person.
Well, and also you owned it. I mean, that's the key thing is to own it, when you do something that doesn't feel so kind. Anyway, yes, just joking about that. We have all done things like that. So that's it for us today. We will be back, I'm sure, with another midlife conversation. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you, Sarah.
Bye.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. Ready to create a life you don't want to escape from? Download your free Blueprint for Change now. This incredible workbook includes some of my favorite coaching tools and will help you get clear on what you need more and less of in your life. Grab it at www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint. That's www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint.